let's begin with a hypothetical. Let's say that you're interviewing for a job with the House Democratic Caucus. All right? And let's say that specifically you're going in to interview as their new social media manager. All right? You're going in for the job where you are going to be helping the House Democratic Caucus be able to craft its social media message for broadly the entire country and the world. Now, let's say that you're a decently progressive person yourself, right? And there's no denying this, right? Like, everyone is pretty aware that you have progressive policies, that you have progressive beliefs. You may even have your own platform, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, where you talk about these policies, right? And the beliefs that you hold and that you try to persuade others to adopt as well. And let's say that you went in right around the same time to do this interview when some elections happened. And when, as it turns out, there were a couple Democrats who lost their seats. And at the same time as this interview, there is a lot of infighting in the Democratic Party about what exactly to do and why they lost the seats that they did. You know? A lot of moderate Democrats are laying effectively this criticism. The reason why we lost, the reason why there were people who lost their seats wasn't because of their policy. It wasn't because of necessarily what we're doing, what we, the moderate Democrats, are doing, but rather it's because they took on such radical far-left ideas that there was no reasonable person who would ever vote for them. They scared people off with ideas of socialism and communism and defund the police and so on and so forth. And that's the reason why we lost people. So the first question that the person who is interviewing you asks when you sit down, she looks at you and she asks you this: what is the better platform for us to take? This is an interesting discussion that we're going to be having, right? We're going to be talking about how to be able to engage in arguments about whether the House Democratic Caucus should be moderate or progressive. Now, I'm going to lay out my beliefs here. I'm pretty honest with them. I'm a decently progressive person, right? I can get behind ideas like the Green New Deal, like defunding the police, although I think that optically the terms that we use with them can be changed to be more accessible to people, because I think that there are strong arguments that, like, phrasing them in such ways is a big reason why people don't end up supporting them. We'll talk about that more later. I think I have a strong, compelling case for why the Democratic Party should not shy away from a progressive platform. I want to be careful with the wording that I'm using, right? Because as we're going to see as we look at various examples and studies and evidence throughout the night, I think what we're going to find is that oftentimes the framing of issues and politicians often matters just as much, if not more, than what politicians are actually saying as far as their policy. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the meat and potatoes of it. Basically, there have been a series of arguments from moderate Democrats. I've assembled what seemed to be the primary ones in this document. And also, for the record, there are going to be a lot of times I'm going to be citing two places where I don't include necessarily direct citations. I compiled a research document with my community over this week, right? This contains citations to all of the information that I'm going to be talking about. Now, I'm going to be making all the information that I talk about tonight available on the video that's going to be uploaded later today. Also, this document is available on my Twitter if someone wants to post it to the stream chat so that other people can be able to access it. This has links to everything, so you can go through and validate and make sure everything I'm saying is kosher, right? But just in case there's like a point in tonight where I have something on the screen where there's not like a direct citation or a link to be able to cite something, it's because I put it in here and I just wanted to save on space, right? That's broadly it. Everything is cited, everything is fact checked. That's all good and kosher. All right. So here are the main arguments that have been coming out recently from moderate Democrats on why the Democratic Party should shy away from a progressive platform. First, and this seems to be the main one, right? U.S. Representative Abigail Spanberger criticized the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives for, quote, losing members who shouldn't have lost by pushing more radical left ideas such as defund the police and socialism. Why don't we go ahead and listen to what she had to say? Fuck ads.
Later.
Actually, let me start by saying, when Hakeem said that we should keep it in the family, what I understood that to mean is that we shouldn't be leaking this to the press, and Manu Raju and Jake Sherman are currently live tweeting the column. So I'd like to begin by being explicitly clear. What I'm about to say, I ask that my colleagues not relay to them. If someone has just conference in Manu Raju or Jake Sherman, gentlemen, this is off the record. I think that we need to be pretty clear about the fact that Tuesday, from a congressional standpoint, it was a failure. It was not a success. We, your colleagues, come and go. This isn't an issue of me being a first-term member and emotionally concerned about the fact that colleagues have left. This is me recognizing that we lost members from Hillary's districts. This is about me recognizing that we lost members who shouldn't have lost. I would request that at some point in the future as a caucus, we spend time watching the attack ads, the millions upon millions of dollars that were spent shellacking so many of us across our districts. That we look at the things that they say about us, that they say about the Democrats, that they say about the way we talk to people and the way we talk about things. Because whether we think it's just an attack ad and that's what it does, et cetera, it doesn't matter because it works.
I also just want to, I don't want to dive into this too much at the moment. But I just want people to be able to process what she just said. It doesn't matter because it works. All right? This is basically an argument that doesn't really matter if what they're saying is accurate, if like their criticism of us, especially if they're calling like a socialist or a communist, is accurate. It doesn't matter because it works. All right? I want people to hold on to this.
The number one concern and things that people brought to me in my that I barely rewind was defunding the police. And I've heard from colleagues who have said, oh, it's the language of the street, we should respect that. We're in Congress. We are professionals. We are supposed to talk about things in the way where we mean what we're talking about. If we don't mean we should defund the police, we shouldn't say that. And so when there are millions upon millions of our members and people in our communities are concerned, we need to recognize that that is on us.
This is a better argument. We're going to talk about it more later. But compared to what she said earlier, this here is a better argument.
Trump is on the ballot. Trump was always going to be a challenge to overcome being on the ballot with him. But he's not going to go away after this election, even when Joe Biden wins. And we need to get back to the basics that brought us across the finish line in 2018, because he was there at that time as well. And for the people who flipped districts that he had won, and certainly for those who won in Hillary's districts, we did it by being hyper. We want to talk about funding social services and ensuring good engagement in community policing. Let's talk about what we are for. And we need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. Because while people think it doesn't matter, it does matter. And we lost good members because of that.
So that's the main thing that I want to get from this, right? Basically, the first, they're going to make attack ads calling us socialists or communists, and no matter what, they're going to be effective. We need to be careful about our language, and we need to stop calling ourselves socialists. All right? These are probably the biggest things to get from her. And we're going to be talking about it more later, but I just kind of want to establish what her criticisms and others, other related criticisms are of having a more progressive platform. Secondly, U.S. Representative James Clyburn, the House Majority Whip, told Alex Thompson in an interview that the phrase defund the police costs an incumbent House Democrat to lose their reelection because sloganeering destroys movements.
The fact of the House seats that you lost and why that happened. Well, it happened simply because we were not able to discipline ourselves according to voter sentiment. We keep making that mistake, this foolishness about you got to be this progressive or that progressive. That phrase, defund the police, cost Jamie Harrison tremendously.
There's that defund the police again. Should have like a defund the police counter going in the video when it's re-uploaded.
I'm not saying it was the only problem.
You sound kind of mad, Congressman. It sounds like you're blaming the more progressive members of your party for holding folks accountable or to a standard that doesn't work in their district. Do you blame the progressive members?
No, I don't blame progressive members. I want everybody in my caucus to be as practical as I am.
We're going to be talking about this word practical some more, because I think that when a lot of people say I feel like that's one of those words that doesn't actually have any meaning, right? Because there are different people who use it so differently that, like, there's not a consistent meaning of what it means to be practical. Broadly speaking, we can say that there are two different kinds of uses of the word practical, right? We have people who use the word practical to mean someone who's able to compromise and be able to negotiate with the other side, and someone who realizes, and someone who basically just kind of capitulates the entirety of their agenda to irrelevancy, right? I just want to hold on to, because I mean, like, a lot of people, it's just one of those words where I hear it a lot, and people will use it like it's this mutually understood word that everyone knows what it means, when people often use it very differently.
That's the difference here. How are you going to look at me and say I'm not progressive? This foolishness about you more progressive than I am, that's poppycock, and I'm not going to listen to it.
If you could,
like, I suppose it'd be the difference between, like, trying to eventually get a policy passed, like trying to implement some actually meaningful police reform, versus, like, completely disregarding it because it's not a practical thing to be able to implement right now.
have a caucus meeting right now, and you would, or tell folks what they should do differently, given the losses that we have, what would you say to them?
Stop sloganeering. Sloganeering kills people. Sloganeering destroys movements. Stop sloganeering. And let's go about the business of representing people and building hopes and aspirations for people.
It seems to me, Congressman, while you all might be celebrating Joe Biden's victory in defeating Donald Trump, the Democratic Party seems more fractured than ever.
We're not more fractured.
I'll come back to this.
Ever. You know,
but thank you.
A party's not fractured by a tweet that goes out or by the expression of one person.
Were you ever worried throughout this campaign and this process that those progressive ideas and slogans would hurt Joe Biden's chances at winning the presidency?
Joe Biden has some very progressive ideas.
The slogans, defunding the police, socialism, represent policies. It's an easy way for Dems to try to sell, or anyone, to try to sell their message.
So yeah, that's another major criticism that a lot of people have been levying. Or that's another example of, like, criticism that moderate Democrats have been levying against progressive Democrats in the House, right? And lastly, we have a statement from U.S. Senator Joe Manchin, where he tweeted that the Democratic Party does not have some crazy socialist agenda, and we do not believe in defunding the police. I'm not going to bring that up because it's just a tweet. There's no video. So basically, if we want to summarize all of these arguments, again, we're steelmanning here, right? We're not downplaying them. We're not, like, devaluing them. Like, we're taking them at complete face value, right? It seems that if we can summarize the arguments, they can be broadly construed as this. Moderate Democrats and Republicans are claiming that progressive Democrats are harming the Democratic platform by pushing socialism and far-left policies like defund the police, and therefore Democrats should capitulate to a moderate platform in order to A, avoid conservative criticism. Remember from the first call, we have to avoid any criticism that conservatives make against us, because no matter what, it's going to be effective, right? We want to be able to avoid conservative criticism. And secondly, because Democratic voters do not like those policies, right? These seem to be the main reasons why these Democrats have alleged that we should move away from a progressive platform and more towards a moderate one. All right? So what I want to do is I want to go through each of these and evaluate how valid are these criticisms and what is the best way for the Democratic Party to go forward strategically, either in a more progressive or in a more moderate kind of platform. That's what I want to talk about. So first, broad question. Some of this, I don't know, maybe kind of easy for some people to answer. Hey, question for people in chat. I really want to ask you, who are actually pushing socialism? Like, who are the politicians that are actually like self-identified socialists in our mainstream politics, like in our federal legislation? Like, can anyone tell me who they actually are? Because it seems that like Republicans tend to throw around this word a lot, but you tell me who are actually the socialists among us. I'm gonna take a sip of tea and read chat. All right, yeah. You've gotten a good number of people, right? So basically, it seems that like we're including people, and a lot of these people come from members, like currently known members of the DSA, and so the people who are self-identified socialists, either people who are members of that or who have just like overtly self-identified as socialists in the public eye. The only self-identifying Democratic socialists currently in federal government are Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowen, and Danny K. Davis. That seems to be it. Like, that's it. This is, like, people. This is the secret far-left socialist conspiracy that basically the entire Republican conservative movement is Barack Obama. We're going to talk about that in a second, right? But these are the people who actually, like, you could make a decently well-faith criticism and say that, and just say that they're socialists. These are the only people who actually identify as socialists or who are otherwise like in socialist organizations, right? Now, some people might say like, okay, well, you know, aren't we able to inductively reason or like deductively reason that other people are socialists based on the policies that they push? Well, let's see how Republicans and conservatives have actually like leveled this criticism of socialism. But before we get to that, also, I would just want to establish, like, so what exactly are, like, the most radical policies that progressive Democrats are pushing, you know? And right now, it seems that the most radical ideas that these and similar politicians have pushed for include Medicare for all, reparations, workers' rights, defunding the police reform, and the Green New Deal. Like, that's it! This is it! This is the secret! Far left! The conspiracy! This is evil cabal socialism in its finest. I mean, maybe you could include something like housing rights. You can include something like uniform basic income. But basically, it's just like anything that involves like a welfare state, police reform, or climate change. That's apparently what socialism is. And I think it's very interesting because like the reason I bring this up is because when people are trying to levy like this criticism of what socialism is, and this is what they're trying to call socialism, it really does make you wonder like what actually the definition of socialism is to a lot of people who actually levy this criticism, right? This becomes important because here's the thing, fam. While Republicans may accurately claim that some Democrats are trying to promote socialism, they most often use socialism as something called a thought-terminating cliche to attack anyone remotely left of center that they disagree with. All right? I'm going to say that again. They most often use socialism as a thought-terminating cliche to attack anyone remotely left of center that they disagree with. Just to clarify, I want to go over exactly what that is to make sure that everyone is on board with what that term means, right? So the broad definition of a thought-terminating cliche, I ripped this from Wikipedia. So if you want to take issue with that, then whatever, fucking sue me. A thought-terminating cliche, also known as semantic stop sign, a thought stopper, bumper sticker logic, or cliche thinking, is a form of loaded language commonly used to quell cognitive dissonance. Depending on context in which a phrase or cliche is used, it may actually be valid and not qualify as thought-terminating. It does qualify as such when its application intends to dismiss or dissent or justify fallacious logic. Its only function, and this is the kicker, its only function is to stop an argument from proceeding further. In other words, end the debate with a cliche, not a point. This is important because I want people to really take a look at how, and we're going to be going over like how Republicans and conservatives have used the term of socialism. But effectively, what we often see are two layers of bad logic, right? First, people will assume that anything remotely left of center, or like conservatives and Republicans will assume that anything remotely left of center that they disagree with is socialism. Healthcare rights is socialism. Welfare is socialism. Anything which helps poor people, that's socialism, right? The Green New Deal, that's socialism. The defunding the police, it's socialism? Question mark. The point here is that like the way that conservatives use it is not as like a critique to say, oh yeah, these are people who believe in decommodification, seizure of the means of productions by the working class, and decommodification of markets, right? But rather, they are people who just like vaguely look at anyone who's remotely left-leaning and just be like, oh yeah, that's someone who's socialist. So that's like the first layer of bad logic. And then the second layer of bad logic is because they're able to rely on like McCarthyism bias against socialism and communism, they can basically just use that pre-programming as a way to be able to vaguely gesture and hand wave away any meaningful criticism of those kind of policies, right? Or rather, they're able to wave off those kind of policies without having to levy meaningful criticism, right? They don't actually have to engage with the merits of why poor people don't deserve Medicare for all because, well, it's socialist. And that's it. That's all they have to say. It's not that, oh yeah, poor people deserve to die if they aren't able to afford healthcare. It's, oh, well, that's socialism. And that's it. That's all that they do. And that's what it means to use socialism as a thought-terminating cliche. All right? Everyone good? Cool. Let's move on. So this is how Trump and Republicans use socialism, right? A couple of really good examples include Trump's State of the Union address, where he said, here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country. Again, no meaningful critique, no meaningful anything. I think somewhere in the discussion, he discussed like a vague allusion to vuvuzela, which is definitely like the most accurate representation of socialism that ever did it. But like, there's no meaningful critique here of like why socialism is bad, right? And this isn't me advocating for socialism, mind you. I'm just acknowledging that the way he's using it right now is not as like a meaningful critique of people, but just as a way to be able to fearmonger against people who he lays that or who he's able to ascribe that label towards, right? That's what he does with it. Another example is Mike Pence, where he told Conservative Political Action Conference that America will never be a socialist country, or the Trump campaign advisor Kimberly Guilfoyle, I don't know how to pronounce that, where she said that Biden, Harris, and their socialist comrades, heavy quotations on that one, will fundamentally change this nation, right? Like making it out like Biden and Harris are the leaders of like the far left socialist agenda. Like Biden, like Joseph R. Biden, the most moderate milquetoast Democrat that could have ever been put on the Democratic platform to begin with. Like he's the one actually leading the socialist revolution in America, right? Like this is ridiculous, isn't it? And I think it's pretty easy to see that when they start trying to levy that criticism against Biden, and it shows how they use this label. And then there's another example where RNC chair Ronna McDaniel said that Democrats have chosen to go down the road to socialism. So yeah, that's how they use it nowadays, right? Like it's pretty clear, but also it's important to recognize that this is nothing new, people. In fact, this has gone back like over the past 90 years and further, right? In 1945, when President Harry Truman, a Democrat, first proposed a national health insurance program, which evolved into what's now known as Medicare, Republicans opposed it, saying that it was dirty, rotten socialism. Socialism is infecting us. We're giving healthcare to poor people. It's socialism, and therefore it's bad, without actually explaining why it's bad. Even Barack Obama's opponents, the Republican Party, the Tea Party, the right-wing blogosphere, and conservative media gurus like Glenn Beck, Ann Coulter, Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, and Rush Limbaugh, labeled anything that Obama proposed, including his incredibly modest healthcare proposals, healthcare reforms, and his efforts to restore regulations on Wall Street, as socialism, right? Like anyone who looks at Obamacare, where it's like we're only like the people who meet like who are like living on the furthest fringes of society, who make basically nothing, are able to qualify for the program, and it still ends up leaving like disproportionately a massive amount of people unemployed in this country. Like to say that that's socialism is just ridiculous, right? And another really good example historically is like when FDR, right, he faced a lot of similar allegations. His conservative enemies, including some members of Congress, consistently called him a socialist. In a speech defending his New Deal, FDR said that a few timid people who fear progress will try to give you new and strange names for what we are doing. Sometimes they'll call it fascism, sometimes communism, sometimes regimentation, sometimes socialism. But in doing so, they are trying to make very complex and theoretical something that is very simple and very practical. That seems like, I don't know y'all about y'all, fam, but I mean, like, that seems as timely today as it did, like, back when FDR was alive, right? Like, this is nothing new. The way that Republicans and conservatives use terms like socialism is nothing new. Because here's the bottom line. Whereas there are some mainstream politics, like, we have to be clear. We have to quote source. Everything is in the research doc. I mentioned it earlier. It's on my Twitter. You can go check it out there. The bottom line, whereas there are some mainstream politicians who are affiliated with socialism, Republicans and conservatives don't care don't care whether they identify with a label. Like, they just don't. They'll call us socialists anyway. It does not matter whether we capitulate to a moderate platform. Like, even if we do something as milquetoast as Obama did, because mind you, Obama tried to do this. Obama tried doing okay, we'll do the moderate milquetoast approach. We'll do the moderate, we're going to do like the most milquetoast, middle of the road kind of healthcare reform. They still called it socialism. They did. You know, Obamacare is socialism. If Obamacare is socialism, then fuck me. Whatever we want to be able to, like, any meaningful thing that we want to be able to propose to them is going to be like communist, fascism, anarchy, right? Like, there's nothing that Republicans will be able to acquiesce to if literally, like, the most milquetoast solution to healthcare problems in America was still called socialism to them, right? And this is something that we need to be able to recognize, because, like, with this, the argument that we should try to capitulate to a moderate platform, I mean, that gets us Obama, which got us to Trump, right? Like that's the line of logic, right? If we stick to like a strictly moderate platform, it gets us into a position where we don't accomplish anything, and then Republicans are able to criticize us for not accomplishing anything, and then they're able to put someone crazy like Trump in the office to say, oh, I'm going to go face off against all those people who weren't able to accomplish anything. Like, if we want another 4 years of Trump, this is the quickest way. This is the quickest way to be able to do it. Now, I want to put out a disclaimer. This is not, right now, this is not an affirmative argument in favor of a progressive platform. Like, everything that we talked about right now, this is not a reason in and of itself to argue in favor of a progressive platform. Right? Like, the fact that no matter what they call us, they'll call it, like, no matter what we do, that they'll call us socialism, that's not an argument for progressive platform, or for a progressive platform in and of itself, right? All that this is that this is only meant as an internal critique of the argument that capitulating to a moderate platform will stop conservatives from labeling us as socialists. To conservatives, the only way to not be a socialist is to be conservative. I want to say this again. This is like the biggest takeaway that I want everyone to get from this. To conservatives, the only way to not be a socialist is to be a conservative. All right? I want you to drill that into your minds. Because if Obama, the person who tried to be as milquetoast, the person who tried to be the middle of the road Democrat, if he's a socialist, I'm sorry to tell you, but there's no one, like, there is no kind of platform that you can push for that's any more moderate than him without becoming conservative. So here's what I want to go from here, right? So the first argument is like, we should capitulate to a moderate platform so that they don't criticize us, or so that they don't label us as socialists, right? I think that's a very bad line of argumentation for what we laid out. But I do want to address, all right, well, what's good about a progressive platform? Like, what is advantageous about a progressive platform to begin with, right? And this is, I think, where we just ask the basic question, which should be apparent in most political dialogue, but which I'm going to ask here. What do people want, right? Do people want a progressive platform? Do people want a moderate platform? I mean, if people want a moderate platform, then it doesn't really matter what, you know, Republicans and conservatives are going to label us as. Like, if people, like, I hate to tell you people, but if what we want, like, if what the people want is a moderate platform, then it's probably better to go with a moderate platform, because that's what's going to win, right? Like, that's democracy. And then the fight for us, if we are progressive, is getting out there and advocating for people to adopt progressive views, right? But as far as like politicians, it is better for them to run on what the majority of people want, right? Like that is the bottom line, you know? And this is where usually like the destiny in the back of my head would say, well, we actually don't know if most people want progressive platforms or progressive ideas, right? Like there's actually a lot of mixed polling on what people want, on whether or not people want like Medicare for all, depending on how it's phrased. There's just not this overwhelming consensus that a lot of people make it out to be. And that's kind of where I want to go, right? Is I want to talk about the polling that's come out. Broadly speaking, over the past couple of years, like we got a lot to go over. It's going to be a lot of data, but I think it's good to go over just to kind of illustrate the point that, yeah, the polling on this is pretty mixed. The polling is not as clear as, oh, everyone wants, you know, progressive policies. Like that's not what it is. We're going to go through it and we're going to talk about the results, but it is a lot more complicated than that. Okay? So let's talk about it.
Disclaimer. Disclaimer. Disclaimer.
Broadly speaking, we're going to have some, so first we're going to go through some anti-progressive poll results, and then we're going to go through some pro-progressive poll results. Try saying that 20 times fast, right? So yeah, just to begin, we're going to be going chronologically, broadly speaking. We're going to be starting right around 2018, the midterm elections, just so we can have the most recent results. And we're going to go through and see all of the studies that have been done and all the polls that have been done on moderate or progressive platforming. A December 2018 third way study found that the 2018 midterm Democrat voters primarily chose moderate candidates and ideas over progressive ones, right? A December 2018 Gallup poll found that given the choice, 54% of rank-and-file Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents would prefer that their party move closer to the center, and 41% would rather that it shifted further left, right? So these are things showing right after the midterm elections that a lot of moderate Democratic voters, or a lot of Democratic voters, wanted the party to move to the center. That's what they were asking for, right? But a March 2019 NBC survey of 800 Americans nationwide, with a margin of error of plus or minus 3.5 percentage points, found a majority support for 5 of 6 proposals that have been percolating in national debate mostly, but not entirely, from Democrat side, including paid maternity leave, which got 84% approval rating, government funding of childcare, 75% approval, boosting the minimum wage, 60%, tuition-free state/public college, 57%, Medicare for all, 54%, a clear majority, and universal basic income, 28%. Again, not as much, but everything else was largely in the majority support, right? Then you had a May 29 New York Times poll of undecided voters that found that 57% were male, 72% were white, 35% have college degrees, and 69% say that they usually vote for a mix of both Democratic and Republican candidates. 48% voted for Donald Trump in 2016 among those who could vote, and that the majority are divided on major issues like single-payer healthcare, immigration, and taxes, but are fairly clear about what they would like from a Democrat and that they would prefer, by 82% to 11%, one who promises to find common ground over one who promises to fight for a progressive agenda. And they prefer a moderate over a liberal, 75 to 19%, and overall 40% describe themselves as conservative, 16% say that they're a liberal, and 40% say that they're moderate, right? I think that this is actually an interesting stat here because it seems like what a lot of people want primarily is someone who promises to find common ground, someone who's able to negotiate, someone who isn't able to be able to compromise. I don't think that that is something which is intrinsically antithetical to a progressive politician, but there's something interesting to be able to note from these results. But again, on the flip side, a July 2019 poll found that although Americans cannot agree on exactly what socialism is, roughly only 20% view it as a threat to the U.S. based on whether or not they consider themselves to be a socialist, which is not as much as actually I was expecting. Like, that was a really interesting result. Then, in October 2019, Pew Research Center study found that 55% of Americans had a negative impression of socialism, because they believe it undermines work ethic, 90% believe that, increases reliance on the government, that was actually the same category as the prior one, had failed historically, 18% undermines democracy, 17%, or respondents just otherwise felt negatively towards it, 17%, while 42%, this is the flip side, right? 42% expressed a positive view, right? Because they believed it creates a fairer, more generous system, that was 31% of that 42, or builds upon and improves capitalism, 20%, right? I think this is actually interesting because, like, what we see here is a common thread with some other of the polls that we've looked at. Like, a lot of them are pretty close, right? 42%, 42 is a nice number. If you want it, then share. But I mean, like, it's very interesting to me that even on like the anti-progressive poll results, a lot of them are not like overwhelmingly. I mean, like, I guess that there was like one prior poll which had pretty overwhelming results, but a lot of them are like pretty close, all things considered, right? And I think that goes into something that we're going to be discussing more later on. But then, in October 2019 data for Progress and YouGov Blue poll on paid family leave found that 2/3 of U.S. voters, 66%, support a program providing up to 12 weeks of paid leave for serious personal or family health issues or to care for a new child, which would be paid for through a payroll tax increase. And that includes large majorities of Democrats and independents and a near majority of Republicans, with only 27% of voters in opposition and the remainder abstaining, right? Like, that's really cool. It means that overwhelmingly, like, this is not looking at like partisan affiliation, but that there's a lot of people, broadly speaking, on both sides of the aisle who are advocating for or who are receptive of like a pretty broadly left idea, you know? I mean, being able to get like paid support for family health issues or for care of a new child, right? I mean, like, that's not exactly like the most conservative take, unless you're focusing on like, I guess the ability for trad wives to be able to stay home and care for children, right? But yeah, like this is pretty cool because it shows that, broadly speaking, yeah, like people are like interested in at least some programs of government assistance and welfare, you know? And then we're still going through, fam. Like, listen, I wanted to get as much as I possibly could, so we're still going through. A January 2020 Pew Research study found that about half of Democratic and Democratic-leaning registered voters, 47%, described their own political views as liberal, including 15% who described their views as very liberal, according to an average of Pew Research Center political surveys conducted in 2019. Yet combined, conservatives and moderates continue to make up about half of Democratic voters, 51%, and liberal growth has slowed in recent years. Right? I mean, like, even in this study, we're able to see that, like, it's not a clear majority. Now, someone could be able to use this argument to say, okay, well, yes, it's only, like, it may be really close, like, as far as within the Democratic Party, but we're not just trying to reach people within the Democratic Party. We're also trying to make sure that people within the Democratic Party don't leave, and we're also trying to reach people who are voting Republican and also people who are undecided voters, right? That's a way you could interpret this to make it even more strongly against kind of, like, further left or liberal bias. Or voters or platforms, but it's still really close in its own right. But then conversely, a February 2020 data for Progress poll showed that in different variations of how Medicare for All is presented, that respondents always supported it more than opposing it, though not by large margins, meaning that although there's reason to believe that Medicare for All is not the political disaster that moderate Democrats fear, it's also clearly not the greatest message for Democratic politicians either. This is very, very, very important, right? Because what this suggests, and we're going to be getting into this more, is that a lot of how people respond to these polls and a lot of what determines whether or not these people support progressive ideas is just how it's packaged. You know? Like, literally in just a study where they, like, presented like how people would support Medicare for All in just like a couple different variations, like literally just changing the framing of how it's presented changed whether or not people liked it, right? It's not actually the difference in how, like, the substantive policy, it's just the packaging that it comes in, you know? I think that's really, really important, but we're going to get into that more in a second. Conversely, an October 2020 Pew Research study found that the public is about evenly split on whether the increased focus on issues of race and racial equality or inequality in the country in the prior 3 months will lead to major political changes to address racial inequality. 48% say that it will, and 51% say that it will not. A sizable share, 46%, say that this will not lead to changes that will improve the lives of Black people. And while a majority say that heightened attention to racial issues represents a change in the way most Americans think about these issues, just 34% say that this represents a major change. But then comparatively, 56% of Democrats in the Hill August 25th to 28th 2020 survey say that they have a favorable view of socialism. So now we've flipped 100%, right? Or not 100%, but we've done a pretty substantive turn from some polling that we've seen before on people's feelings towards socialism, compared to 53% who said the same about capitalism. By contrast, Republican voters are overwhelmingly more in favor of capitalism and socialism at 74% and 26% respectively, which is about right. You know, I mean, like the only people who are going to be like largely receptive towards socialism are probably going to be Democrats, but still interesting that 26%, like that's like a whole quarter of Republicans are like favorable towards socialism. I think that's really interesting. I don't know. Maybe that's like the Nosbol part of the Republican Party who haven't realized that they're Nosbols. But it's just an interesting stat that I noticed when I first saw it. And also, who the fuck are those socialist Republicans? Well, yeah, they're Nosbols. That's what they are. And then a September 2020 Pew Research study found that the majorities of adults say that federal government should play a major role on a wide variety of issues, such as how roughly 9 in 10 say that the government should play a major role in keeping countries safe from terrorism, 91%, responding to natural disasters, 87%, and ensuring safe food and medicine, right? 87%. Again, it's just 100% a difference in framing. It's absolutely a difference in framing, right? But just like, yeah, ensuring safe food and medicine, yeah, that's going to be widely accessible to everyone. Like the difference between framing it in that way and framing it as Medicare for all, honestly, it seems to make a really big difference. Whereas smaller majorities say it plays a major role in helping people get out of poverty, 62%, really cool. That's literally just that's just a welfare state, right? And ensuring access to healthcare, 65%. Right? Like, I hope that we're getting pretty clear, people. We only have a couple more. I just kind of want to drive home the point. In the October 2020 American Value Survey, the Brookings Institute found that 79% of all Americans believe that we need major policy change to help everyday Americans, with 93% Democrats and 62% of Republicans agreeing. 70% of all Americans agree with guaranteeing all Americans a minimum income, with 88% of Democrats and 52% of Republicans agreeing with that, right? That's 52%. That's more than half of Republicans. And that 83% of all Americans agree with guaranteeing all Americans access to affordable childcare, with 95% of Democrats and 71% of Republicans agreeing. Again, this is all just these are left ideas. These are progressive ideas, right? This is fundamentally talking about a welfare state, right? But it's just the difference in how you package it. It's all the difference. And then, as recently as in November 2020, Arthur found that only 1 out of the 93 House co-sponsors of the Green New Deal who ran for a seat in Congress's lower chamber in 2020 lost re-election. That 4 House co-sponsors, who are in the districts that range from very slightly Democratic to moderately Republican, decisively won their re-election bids, including Reps Mike Levin, Jahana Hayes, and Peter DeFazio. Now, outside of Representative Tom Suozzi, who at the time, this came from an article that's cited in the document that I have, go to my Twitter, or in the link in the video once it goes up, who's currently behind in his race in New York by about 4,000 votes, but is projected to easily win once all mail-in ballots are counted, according to Cook Political Report's Dave Wasserman. The only Green New Deal co-sponsor to lose is Florida Representative Debbie Murcaso-Powell. All right, I want people to understand this, right? For saying that, like, oh, well, you know, the thing that scared away voters was the crazy progressive ideas, like defund the police and socialism. Well, here we have it pretty clear where most of the people, like overwhelmingly, the people who co-signed onto the Green New Deal won re-election, right? Like, people like these ideas. It's not a matter of people like downvoting or voting away or voting out people who don't like these ideas. It's probably going to come down to a matter that these people presented their ideas in a much more accessible way, right? This is the bottom line, people. Polling and evidence on how Democratic voters feel about progressive policies are mixed, all right? I mean, that's what the polling says, right? So when you talk to people who are like, oh, well, you know, the evidence is pretty overwhelmingly showing that, like, one, you know, that actually it's not that clear on whether or not Democrats want progressive policies. It's not that clear on what, you know, the voters actually want. So we should probably go to moderate just to be safe. It is mixed. But as we've already talked about, and we're going to be talking about a little bit more, what I'm going to argue, right? And this is my argument, right? I'm going to say that the primary reason why a lot of those results have come in the way that they have is by virtue of how the polls are framed, not by virtue of the policies themselves. Okay? Let's talk about some studies. Evidence seems to suggest that framing of various issues influences how people poll on them. Here's an example. In a 2005 Gallup study that found that differences in question wording about the same issue sometimes do and sometimes do not produce major differences in what the polls measure. When polls show major differences in results about the same question, we gain insight into how the framing of issues affects public opinion. On the other hand, when polls find similar results despite different question wordings, it indicates a solid public consensus about the issue, right? So right here, we have a really good example of a study where we are able to identify that when you have a lot of variation based on how questions are asked, like what we've been talking about, what that suggests is not that there's a public consensus on the issue. Like, what this suggests is not that everyone has the same views about Medicare for all and the same views about other defund the police or those kind of policies. What it suggests is that most of the variation is probably explainable by virtue of how those polls are presented, not by virtue of the actual policies themselves. Here are some others. A 2007 study analyzing a ballot in which two virtually identical popular initiatives, both demanding a decrease in legal age of retirement in Switzerland, led to differences in approval rates of nearly 7 percentage points and found that the average difference in support rates of 6.6% points for two virtually identical initiatives can be largely attributed to the different framings of their titles, and therefore the wording of the political issues is important. Literally, in Switzerland, two virtually identical political initiatives were presented, and there was such an overwhelming disparity in how they were voted on based just on how they were presented, right? Maybe we need to do better representing them. I mean, well, let's see where this goes, right? Another example is that in February 2012, a study conducting two experiments found results suggesting that framing the issue negatively, for example, anti-Democrat or anti-Republican, resulted in respondents' attitudes being held with more certainty that when the issue was framed positively, for example, pro-Democrat or pro-Republican. I mean, we can see this on the left, right? I mean, this is pretty easy to recognize. A lot of people here probably feel let's take one example, all right? Let's take the Green New Deal, all right, since we've been talking about it. There are a lot of people... Actually, no, I don't want to take that because that's not necessarily, anti-Republican. Let's take police reform, right? We don't even say defund the police. Let's just say broadly police reform, right? A lot of you probably believe that, but you're probably going to feel more strongly about it if I say that it is anti-Republican or anti-conservative rather than pro-Democrat, all right? I mean, this is the whole Bernie or bust thing, right? Because whether or not, there are so many people on the left who will feel much stronger about a position if it is anti the opposing party, rather than if it's pro a party that you may or may not affiliate with, or you may have indifferent feelings towards, right? It's a lot easier to know what you're not than what you are. And this is just demonstrating that, that can influence how people respond to certain ideas in polling, or in this case, elections, when you present them differently, right? This is a really good example of that. And finally, a January 2012 study published in the American Journal of Political Science found that citizens do not simply ignore policy information when they are also exposed to party cues, but rather respond by shifting their opinions away from their party's positions when policy information provides a compelling reason for doing so. Challenging the prominent claim that citizens blindly follow their party when also exposed to policy information, and also suggesting that efforts to inform the electorate can influence opinions, provided that citizens can actually receive the information being disseminated, right? This is really important, because what this suggests is that there's actually evidence to be able to show that a lot of people, while there's a lot of speculation that people will blindly adhere to their party, there is evidence to be able to show that if we are able to reach people, all right, if we're able to reach people and we're able to actually talk to them and get them the information, some people are just going to be far gone, right? There are some people who we just can't do anything. People who go on, the conservatives who go on, the conservatives and conspiracy theorists who go on Dylan Burns and whatever, those people are far gone, right? Those people are gone. But there are some people who we can reach. Most people, if they are exposed to the right kind of information, will probably believe it. And we see this kind of thing in the inverse, right? Like we see misinformation campaigns like PragerU and basically everyone conservative online that try to present themselves as persuasive and credible authority, who try to present heavy quotations facts as a way to be able to persuade people, right? And that's normally the thing that radicalizes people down the right. It's not just that like they hate Muslims or they hate black people or they hate minorities. Usually a lot of these people will try to represent themselves as like very logically consistent and secular intellectuals, authorities on the matters, right? And that's, I think, what's most important, right? Is because like the right's figured this out, you know? The strategy is to reach as many people as possible and to present them with credible evidence and to be able to frame our policies in ways which are most accessible. Let's have a chat. I really like thinking about this because this actually gave me a lot of hope for the other day. Can I get some hype, some RGR hypes in chat for people who saw my conversation or the recent video that went up where I talked to a trans Trump supporter? Let me get some hypes. You started hyping before I finished the sentence. You don't count. But everyone from here on out, let me get some hypes in chat if you watched that. So recently, just purely by coincidence, right? Recently, I was just streaming. I was doing ESO and doing research, and I just happened to have a trans Trump supporter wander in the chat, right? And originally, like my thought when I saw that, like literally it was someone who just popped in the chat and it was like, "Hey, I'm a trans Trump supporter." And I looked at it and I was like, "Oh, this will be great." Yeah, but so basically what I was really concerned about, because at this point, you know, I've gotten, I don't know, the internet has a tendency to make you, I think, a little like cynical about the state of politics, right? And like I think that a lot of people tend to get the impression that most people, especially like those who are already conservative, or those who are like non-political, just can't be reached. That like they're just like that there's literally nothing that you can say to them to be able to change their mind. And mind you, I do think that there are a lot of people who are like that, right? But like there are a lot of people who just happen to be, let's say, morally unlucky, right? I don't love quoting Zam, but I'm going to just like reference back to the debate he had the other day. You know, there are some people who are born who are morally lucky, right? Who basically are able to be born into families and who are raised to believe the basic right ideas, you know, treat everyone equally, don't be racist, don't be like don't believe in like the JQ or that kind of shit, right? But there are people who don't necessarily know why, you know? I don't know if this is something that's discussed a lot on the left. Maybe it is. I don't know. I probably am not inventing something new. But there's like an inverse to that, right? Of being morally unlucky. Of happening to be like altogether a decent person, but being born into a circumstance where you're probably not exposed to the greatest ideas growing up. And so you might believe a lot of things like Trump is great for America and not actually know why, you know? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad person. That doesn't mean that the people that you're talking to are necessarily bad people. What that means is that it's a matter of being able to reach them and be able to literally just like talk through their policies, the reason why they believe the things that they do, and what they actually want out of a politician, you know? When I talked to this person, literally the thing that he wanted was basically like gay space communism. He wanted everyone to get along, and he wanted science to lead society, and he wanted everyone to be sitting around singing Kumbaya, right? And like that is like the complete opposite of what Trump advocates for, right? But the thing is that there are a lot of people who vote like that. There are a lot of, like, there are tons and tons and tons of people in America who think exactly like that kid does. You know? I think that what's going to be important for us going forward, right? Because, like, progressive ideas have a lot of weight. Progressive ideas have a lot of power, because the fact of the matter is guaranteeing, like, easy access to Medicare, like, to medical care for everyone is not exactly an idea that most people hate. It's not like anyone firmly believes in their heart of hearts that the difference between you living or dying should be your ability or your inability to be able to pay for your healthcare, right? Like, that's not exactly a position that a lot of people hold, you know? It's just that we live in a society where there's a whole bunch of reasons why people might hold on to that position, whether it's the culture that they've been grown into, whether it's some kind of idea of personal responsibility, whether it's this idea that like, oh, well, you should have to work for what you've got because I had to work for it myself, right? Even though we're talking about something which is literally the difference between someone fucking living or dying, right? I mean, there could be a number of reasons why people hold these beliefs, but if you know how to be able to respond to them, if you know how to be able to make the arguments, you can still reach them. How do you not villainize those who support your destruction? Interesting. But yeah, I think that what's most important here is to recognize. And so this is basically, so let's bring this back in. All right, let's bring this back into the hypothetical. All right, let's say that I'm sitting across from the person who is conducting this interview, and she asked me, all right, Riley, thank you for coming in. I really appreciate your time. We are experiencing, this this conflict right now. There are people in the Democratic caucus and the Democratic Party who believe either that we should move more moderate or that we should move more progressive. And I want your input on, since especially you'd be helping us with social media, what do you recommend that we do? And this is what I would say, right? First, I would respond to the argument that, like, listen, we shouldn't try to capitulate to them so that they don't call us socialists, right? We don't push socialism. There's like a small handful of politicians in government, like in mainstream government, who actually who are realistically like somewhat associated with socialism, and like what they push is like easier access to healthcare and like more affordable housing and like generally just like a better welfare state, right? Or like workers' rights or the Green New Deal, right? Like that's their scary socialism conspiracy, right? But the fact of the matter is, like, they called Obama a socialist, right? For trying to propose, push Obamacare. That was the middle ground. That was supposed to be the compromise. That's like the moderate position of Democrats, right? If we want to try and be Obama, and if we want to try and take that position to just like hope that they don't end up calling us a socialist, not only are they going to, but we're also going to end up with the same conditions that brought about Trump. Because at the end of 4 years, they're going to be able to point at us and say, oh, they haven't done shit over 4 years. It's definitely not on, any fault on our part, but we're definitely going to point the finger entirely at them, and we're going to propose someone who's going to be much more radical than anything that we've seen before. And so then she would respond to me and say, all right, well, Riley, that's all very well and good. I think I see your point there. But the problem is that doesn't actually tell us whether or not it's good to affirmatively take on a progressive platform. That doesn't tell us whether or not a progressive platform would actually be like what people want, right? Sure, that might be a critique to them calling us a socialist or communist or whatever. And I agree that we shouldn't capitulate to them, especially when they're able to move the goalposts such that they can basically do it, levy that kind of a criticism up to the point where we basically just become conservatives. But also, I want to make sure that we're actually like reaching voters who want us, like who want a platform that we're pushing, right? So what do you have to say to that? And then I would look at her and I would just be honest, right? Listen, the polling is mixed, right? But I would make the argument that most of the evidence about which explains why that polling may be mixed, is because it's not a problem with the policies themselves, right? Most people can get behind the idea of making sure that everyone is able to get affordable healthcare, that the difference between living or dying should be your inability to pay for your healthcare. It seems to be that a lot of the issue is just in how we frame our issues. So what I would propose, especially with Dem social media going forward, is this. Don't lose the progressive parts of your platform. Change how you present it. Don't say things like defund the police. All right? Just say what you mean, There are some police departments which are vastly overfunded for what they actually need. And so a good policy could be to take away some of the funding that they have, which they do not need, and put it towards social programs, which could actually benefit people. I don't know if people can hear that outside. What the hell is going on out there? I have no fucking clue. It's just really bothering me. I'm going to close the window then real quick. Listen. Don't talk about, or don't say defund the police, right? Because I will be completely honest, that is, practically speaking, just bad optics, right? If you say defund the police, then most people are going to basically equivalate that to saying oh, we're going to get rid of the police entirely. If you try to say that we should actually get rid of the police, you will never get public support behind that. I'm sorry. Even if you are able to like argue it logically consistently, like there's no way you're going to be able to get that to pass, right? The better argument to be able to make right now is to be able to put in more use of force restrictions to make sure that what happened with George Floyd and other people this past summer and over the past couple of years doesn't happen anymore, at least in the way that it did. And then also be able to make sure that we're taking away overfunded police departments' funds and putting them towards things which actually matter, or which can like more substantively help in situations where police like shouldn't be involved. Like, for example, with mental health cases, right? It's not great where we send police officers to deal with issues where, you know, the better resolution is to send like mental health professionals rather than someone with a fucking gun. We're going to look over this really quick because this is a really good example. Hunter Avalone, smart boyo, good boyo. I like him. I'd really like to talk with him someday. Hunter, I hope that you're watching me right now. But yeah, like this is a really good example, right? Here's why Medicare for all should be a right-wing position, a thread. It'll be better for the economy. A Medicare for all system would actually be 13% cheaper overall, and even a Koch-funded study found that Medicare for all would save around $2 trillion over a 10-year period. Some even said it would save enough to start paying down our nation debt. Pro-life. If you're pro-life, you want to do everything you can to lower abortion rates. Countless studies have repeatedly shown that access to free contraceptives lowers the rates of unplanned pregnancies. Duh. That's the #1 reason for abortion. Traditional values. It's a fact that the nuclear family structure is the best for children. Medicare for all would allow for more people to have children and take care of them properly. That could lower the rate of abortions, too. Nationalism. If you really want to LARP around about our national identity or something, then it makes complete sense and total sense that we as a nation can take care of our own. And saving you money. One of the main arguments against Medicare for all is the prospect of raising taxes. We want to save money, but higher taxes won't matter overall when we're saving significant amount of money on healthcare. We'd still walk away with more money in our pockets. Like, that's what we want, you know? Like, that's the way that we get to people, right? Because it's literally the same policy, right? It's just a matter of putting it in ways that will reach more people. So what I would say, so basically to summarize this and talk to the interviewer, I would say, listen, it's better to not try and capitulate to what moderate Democrats and what conservatives want us to do. If we do that, we're going to end up with Obama. We're going to end up with the same situation where they called it socialism before. We're going to end up with bad policy like Obamacare, and we're going to end up in the same kind of situation where people are going to end up where the preconditions for what brought about Trump is going to happen again, and we're going to have Trump 2.0. That's what's going to happen. So we shouldn't capitulate, and what instead we should do is we should try to reframe our policies to make them more accessible to people. Don't use things like defund the police. Don't use the Green New Deal. Literally focus on framing the policies, keep them the same or largely the same, and make them more accessible to people. Because what I firmly believe we will find, based on the evidence, if we're able to educate more people about the validity of the policies, that they will be able to reach more people. And that more people will get behind them. The bottom line is that a lot of people feel disenfranchised by politics. Most politics does not affect the average person. I want to talk a little bit about the myth of, like, the moderate middle. Like, I think that it is very important to be able to recognize the fact that, like, when we talk about, like, the middle moderate that a lot of people are trying to reach, most of the time these people end up slanting conservative. I'm going to tell you why. Usually when we're talking about people who identify as moderate or non-political or whatever, usually it's because these people come from such a position in life where politics does not affect them so much on a day-to-day scale or on you know, in their day-to-day life, that they're able to basically ignore it. And they're able to ignore it because most political decisions, most political elections, laws, whatever, probably won't affect them. And so it's really easy to be able to get disassociated with politics when the status quo serves your interests. And so the reason why a lot of these people probably end up slanting more conservative is because when we talk about introducing change, oftentimes it's construed as an attack or a threat to a lot of people's current status in life, right? If you have someone who believes that, oh, everything is great in life right now, or at least I'm able to get by and everything is fine and I can go on living my life good, God, and dandy, there's no reason for them to really be concerned about getting involved in politics, because to them, why should they? Everything is fine. And so the way that you want to reach them is by showing them the ways that their life is not fine, right? By showing them actually it's pretty shitty, that you should constantly have to worry about where you're going to be able to pay for your health insurance, that you should constantly have to worry about, being on the verge of homelessness, representation in the workplace, having very little bargaining power in where you're able to live or with housing, right? Like there are many, many issues. Education is another great example, being able to reach people and talk about the fact that like it's really shitty that some people are just basically condemned to a certain type of lifestyle depending on where they're born into and whether or not they happen to, just by virtue of random luck and chance, get into a good education system, Like there are plenty of ways to be able to reach people. I mean, this is manufactured consent, right? Or this is like capitalist realism or whatever you want to call it, right? It's the idea that, the way that things are, since this is the only way I've known and I can't imagine anything different, well, this is the only way it can be, right? You have to be able to show them that things can be different, that there are injustices that exist in people's lives, and that there are things that we can do to change them. The fact of the matter is, we live in a country where most people have been wronged in some way or another, whether it's based on their class, whether it's based on their race, ethnicity, gender identity, whether it's this is intersectionality in a nutshell, baby. Most people are not treated well in society unless they're like cishet white people who live at the top 1% of the society. We have that on our side. We have that to our benefit. We want change, and most people would benefit from it. The thing that is prohibiting us from reaching these voters is not the policy we are pushing, but rather how we are pushing it and the way that we convey information. I would argue that the best way to be able to get these voters is not by changing our politics, is not by changing our policy or our platform to the thing that brought about Trump to begin with, but rather by making sure that we're able to reach these voters who previously have not been able to be reached. And it's going to be really important that we do this fast, because the thing is, if we do not, the Republicans will, and they've already tried. Basically, they use the fact that we haven't been able to do anything substantive as a criticism against us to say, the Democrats have failed you. The Democrats have fucked you over. And so we're going to base our entire platform on fighting the establishment, the corrupt establishment that wants to keep you down. Because whether you like it or not, there's a kernel of truth in that. Yeah, the moderate Democratic platform has done jack shit. And people are mad about it. Now, there are good reasons that people should be mad about it. But if we don't do anything to try and reach these voters, Republicans will. And they'll give them bad reasons to believe that they have the right answers. And they don't. A lot of our work needs to be showing them that we have the right answers so that they do not radicalize people to fucking fascism. Because I don't know if you're aware, but today there was a rally, or there currently is a rally over in DC, about all of Trump's fans being upset that he had the election stolen away from him. That their champion, that their beacon of hope in a corrupt society, heavy quotations, was taken out of office, and that they don't have any conceivable hope in the future. These are people who believe that Trump was the answer to getting them meaningful reform. And it's really sad, because not only are these people misguided, not only are these people fundamentally wrong in that respect, because I hate to tell them, Trump is the establishment. But this is such an easy win for us. Because whereas they don't have policy to actually be able to deal with the issues that these people face, we do. And they're the progressive ones. Don't abandon the thing that makes us better than the Republicans. Because like I said before, to conservatives, the only thing that's not socialist is conservatism. They're going to call us that no matter what we push. So let's not capitulate to them. Let's not let them control our narrative. Let's do what the people want us to do. And let's push a progressive platform and push it right.